The White Lotus is back this week with the second episode of Season 2, and it's safe to say that things didn't get any clearer. They got even more confusing. But I'd say that's the beauty of this show. With catty friendships coming to light, the Ratliffs family dynamic seeming even more strange than before, a robbery taking place in the hotel shop, and the focus on Rick coming from absolutely nothing and feeling as though he is nothing. This episode developed the plot forward and allowed even more mystery to be at the heart of what we were watching. With the importance of onlookers and people listening to conversations in passing and watching people in the distance, the episode supported that in a number of different ways. However, with it beginning with the camera slowly moving in from the viewpoint of nature and it concluding with it doing the opposite and retracting back into the forest, that was probably one of my favorite touches that leaned into that specific point. So with that, let's dive into the episode and break down all that there was to take away from it. Here is The White Lotus Season 3, Episode 2, Ending Explained. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. The importance of the alternative perspective. One thing that I feel has had a key focus in the first two episodes is the perspective of an onlooker. Something that's been shown to us through the use of the monkeys and the fact that they're ever present in the trees and are watching everything just unfold in front of them, and also through the use of the camera angles and the way that it'll just be perched down and made out as if somebody's watching what's going on. Something which was supported with Laurie, Jaclyn and Kate to name just one occasion. I feel this has been done because revelations are most likely going to be made through overhearing or witnessing from afar. Right now, we've already seen that taking place with the likes of Belinda noticing Greg and also Rick hearing that Jim Hollinger lived in Bangkok and now he was going to be heading there because he heard it. One way that I feel it's going to be detrimental though in the immediate timeline is with the way that Gatok overheard Timothy on the phone, and there was a heavy focus of Gatok listening in and watching Timothy get irate. This observation happened after the store was robbed in the hotel and the police were called. Timothy said, "Am I implicated?" when on the phone to Kenny, and Gatok looked over at that specific point. So I wonder if Gatok is going to report this phone call to the authorities and Timothy might get entangled in the case for the hunt for the suspect of the robbery, because Gatok could be assuming that he was talking about that. Whilst on the topic of the robbery, I actually think that Valentine was behind it. I think him pulling up on the bike and talking to Gatok was part of the plan as a way of getting the car through the barrier, as it would have already been up. Plus, I also think the snake choker will end up being something that causes the suspect to be exposed, as there was a focus on it when Chelsea wanted to try it on. As well as overhearing with Rick, we saw it with Jaclyn when she heard that Laurie and Kate were gossiping about her. So it does seem like people never truly being alone, and the alternative perspective of their conversation or actions is something that is at the epicenter of this season of the show, and it's what will directly lead to repercussions. The Ratliffs. This family dynamic is getting weirder and weirder by the day. A couple of things that we learnt in this episode about the Ratliffs was that Timothy is well and truly finished. The moment that he touches down on US soil, he's going to be having the FBI looking for him and the laundering operation that he was involved in. The Wall Street Journal was writing an article and the Washington Post was doing one too. So the walls were closing in on him, and the fact that he was isolated in Thailand, operating in a completely different time zone, it meant that he was powerless and could do nothing. Even though he finally got in contact with Kenny, it looked like there was no saving grace for him, and the small involvement that he had which allowed him to gain $10 million won't be worth the sacrifice of going to prison. I thought it was interesting that all of the family were having these treatments to calm themselves down, and the person that needed calming the most, which was Timothy, wasn't having one done, and was instead running on the treadmill and looking more stressed than ever. The score in the background, which went rather ominous and mysterious when it cut to him, supported that massively too. The final shot of Timothy looking over at his family following the phone call that he had with Kenny felt like it was highlighting what he was about to lose, and the family that was about to be destroyed due to his actions. They don't know anything about what he's done. In fact, Victoria was praising him and saying how much of a hard worker he was. So when they eventually find out the truth, the dynamic in the family will change even more. There were a couple of things about the treatments which I feel were telling of the characters. The first was that Victoria was going to a massage, which was all about becoming relaxed, but prior to her having a massage, she was looking to take some tablets to put her in a relaxed state, showing the type of character that she was, especially when it came to being on medication and taking tablets. Piper was actually immersing herself within it, which showed that she was true to wanting to explore Buddhism. However, the strange person in front of her was creeping her out, maybe highlighting that there's no escaping creepy guys for her. When she's at home, there's Saxon, and when she's outside, there's men that gawp at her for no reason at all. Then one of the more interesting ones was Jaclyn. We know that Jaclyn is somebody that seems to have a lot going on inside of his head. It feels like he's hiding his sexuality, or is at least questioning it. So having him in a deprivation tank where all he had was his own thoughts and he couldn't hide away from them, it was a really appropriate place for him to be. I also feel like we saw that Saxon is trying to live in his father's shadow and is almost trying to be him. He sees him as a role model, more so than his other siblings do, and this was shown most when he said how he didn't like taking any kind of tablets if he didn't need to, like his father said, despite the fact that Saxon does take stuff apparently. Plus, he was also asking him about his workout and tried talking about the gym with him, but his father just ignored him. So the admiration isn't deserved, but Saxon's alpha mentality is what he almost overcompensates with in order to get his father's attention. Seeing small things like him looking at a waiter's behind when she's right next to him, it just shows the type of person he is and the crude mentality that he has. I would say that it seems like Chloe and Saxon could end up getting with one another, especially after she called him cute. I feel like Greg, who's posing as Gary, and also Chloe, they're in on a scam together and they're not actually a couple. I think they're actually looking to do something sinister on this trip together. I feel like this was supported when Victoria said the line, "Most people are scammers, you have to be hyper-vigilant," and then the camera cut straight to Chloe and Greg. So with Saxon craving attention and him not getting it from anybody, could Chloe potentially showing him some kind of attention cause even more issues within the family that's already imploding and exploding at the same time? I would say that the siblings' dynamic is also extremely strange. Jaclyn was just staring at Saxon's behind whilst he was asleep. It's genuinely so odd and I hope nothing weird ends up coming from that. But with it being the White Lotus, I've come to expect something weird. Laurie, Jaclyn, and Kate. Now this was a really interesting dynamic within the episode. I loved how the first time we saw these friends in the episode and the final time we saw them, it essentially had the same conversation taking place, but just about a different friend. The only similarity between the conversations was that Kate was at the heart of both of them. During the opening section, we saw that Kate and Jaclyn were talking about Laurie, and they were initially speaking kindly of her, and they mentioned how they hadn't seen her in around 4 years, but then it turned into them judging her and her life choices. For example, they discussed her child and said how she was kicked out of several schools. They mentioned that Laurie looked defeated after moments earlier saying that she looked great. So it showed the cattiness, competitiveness, and two-faced nature that was amongst the three of them. They weren't ever saying it to each other's faces, it was all behind their backs. When this was also paired with the final part of the episode, we saw that this time it was Laurie and Kate that were speaking about Jaclyn and her life choices. They spoke about her marriage and also how she looked as well, showing that even though they were the best of friends with each other, behind each other's backs they were being cruel about the other person, making comments and laughing about the things that they'd said, kinda showing that they were all as bad as each other. I felt bad for Laurie when she was being slated at the start, but then I realized that she's actually just as bad as the others. We're yet to see Kate be on the receiving end of a harsh tongue, but I imagine that is probably on the horizon. We saw that the three of them went to have their statistics looked at, and both Jaclyn and Laurie had similar readings about their body, which is something that Jaclyn was shocked about, and she actually vocalized that. But it was Kate who didn't receive the complimentary readings that she wanted to see, something which led to us learning more about Jaclyn's husband that's 10 years younger than her, and the other two looking tired of hearing about it, and also Kate feeling inferior to the others in that situation. I don't think there's going to be any kind of deadly dynamic amongst the three of them. I think their characters and story in the show is all about friendships, how competitive they can be, how two-faced many people can be despite being the people that they're closest to. And I think we're going to ultimately watch this friendship dissolve, because this one is not lasting 7 days in Thailand where all they've got is each other. An element of their story that I thought was interesting was when Kate went over to Victoria and mentioned how she remembered her from Claire's baby shower 10 years ago, and Victoria just came across as cold and rude. Kate didn't like the fact that Victoria didn't remember her from that baby shower, and you could see that she was uncomfortable about it and it bothered her. Whilst this didn't show much, what it did show was that she likes to be remembered and feels as though she does when she meets people. So I wonder if she's going to overcompensate moving forward following what Victoria said. Rick and Chelsea. I actually found Rick to be the most interesting character in the episode. He seems to be an extremely reserved individual, and him being taken on a double date with Chloe and Greg, who was posing as Gary, showed just how much he didn't want to be there. He also clocked onto the fact that they probably weren't a legit couple due to the whole matchmaking agency in Dubai story. I'd also say that when Rick asked how they both met, there was a pause between Greg and Chloe, as if to insinuate that none of them knew which one would go first and what they'd say, so there's definitely more than meets the eye with them. We did find out a bit more about Rick in this episode and his past. He said that his mother was an addict and his father was murdered before he was born. He mentioned that he didn't have an identity and that he was simply nothing. I do question if this is true or if this is part of a story that he's telling. He has such a strong focus on Jim Hollinger, and I question why it is that he's so interested in him. Could he be his father, and he's tracked him down because he wants to confront him about his absence, or maybe something that he did? I feel like there's definitely a possibility that it could be the case, considering the age gap between the both of them. Rick seems to be holding on to some trauma of some kind, because he's a rather reserved individual, and as Chelsea puts it, he's grumpy. So I feel like Hollinger does have a personal connection to him in some way. My review of the episode. I thought this was a great continuation of the show. Each character's arc holds their own value, and none is less interesting than the other. All I'd say with Belinda is that we've not seen too much of her right now, but I feel she's going to be important moving forward. This is because of her son Zion and the fact that he's flying out there. She's watching on as Greg is at the hotel, and she also seems to be getting flustered, with it looking like she might get romantically entangled with the masseur that she's working closely with. One thing that I absolutely love about this show is the score. I feel the music is so immersive and it supports the scene that we're watching unfold in the most perfect way possible. Whether that be in providing tension, adding a mysterious feel, or even the comedic side that occurs from time to time. The composer really knows what they're doing, and I'd also say that it's supportive of the environment as well. Having the ever-present sound of nature and animals at the core of this show provides that atmospheric element and leads into the fact that the characters aren't alone out there. Despite them thinking that they are, there's always something watching and something listening. I think my favourite story right now is probably the Ratliffs and also Rick and Chelsea's. I feel that both of those arcs have the most at stake at the moment, and they're definitely the interesting ones. The family dynamic in the Ratliffs is just so toxic and strange, but it's so entertaining to watch at the same time. So, there you have it. The White Lotus Season 3 Episode 2 Ending Explained. If you want to see more videos on the White Lotus, then click on the card in the top corner. There'll be a playlist there, and don't forget to subscribe to see future breakdowns. Thanks for tuning into this week's breakdown on the White Lotus, and I'll see you in the next one.